comments. Member Lear?
Here.
Member Bollinger?
Here.
Member Longacre?
Here.
Member Hall?
Here.
And Vanessa, we have public comment today, is that correct? Okay. And is anyone here, I see Braden, is anyone else in the room for public comment? Yes, okay. Then Braden, let's start with you. Looks like you're first, and everyone will be capped at 3 minutes. And I will keep time, if that's okay. Oh, Carol, that'll be great.
Where do you want me to propose? Just any chair?
Yeah.
Pick a chair. Okay, we're live. All right, well. Board Member Carey, thank you for having me here. Rest of the board, thank you. So you guys saw me yesterday. I just kind of had a quick 2-minute rundown of the situation with the Turning Point chapter at Fremont. But I just wanted to come back because as I've dug into the situation with the clubs and groups and all those things, I've stumbled across other people who are struggling with similar things and biases in our schools. Some of it's concerning. I see a lot of anti-American sentiment, kids being suspended for bringing flags to school, a lot of different things going on in the Weaver County area that concern me because our kids should come to school and get a fair and balanced education. And one of the ones that really stuck out to me that kind of aligns with the challenges we're having with Turning Points is this unbalanced books in our libraries. Children can't find access to conservative presidents to do reports on. They can only find access to the other side. And so we have to balance things. There can't be this have and have nots and some of the issues that we were seeing with the Turning Point situation. Some of my major concerns are the fact that currently the law reads and mentions schools for the clubs and groups have the authority, and so that's been levied down to the individual principals to make the decisions of what's a group, what's curriculum, what's not curriculum, and there's huge disparity across every school. So you go 2 miles down the road to Roy actually does a really good job of trying to balance, engage their kids in the clubs. They have Club Rush, and all clubs and all groups are included in this thing. And then you drive, 3 miles to the north, and certain clubs get certain treatment, and there's just a disparity. And so our goal is to start conversation not only here in law and licensing and look at how our rules are laid out across the district, but I'm also engaged with the legislature because we want to look at the actual laws they're passing to see what are opportunities that we can maybe shore up the verbiage, look at those things, and figure out a way to ensure every child has the same opportunity. And the real reason I'm here is I look at public education and the declining enrollment in public education, and a lot of it is because people withdraw their kids because they feel like their kids aren't getting the teaching and the principles that they need to get in the public education, and so they pull them out. This is really about saving public education. We have to have balance. It's got to be fair for all groups. And, I just appreciate the time, and thanks for everything that you guys do.
Braden, thank you very much. Sarah Jones, thank you.
Good morning, board members. You do an early start after a long day on Thursdays, so good for you for doing that. I'm Dr. Sarah Jones. I'm with the Utah Education Association. I just wanted to speak briefly on Rule R277322 Codes of Conduct that you're going to be discussing later on this morning. I'm not going to talk about the substance of the rule, but really rather the process. Yesterday, the full board made a motion, Board Member Carey's motion, to authorize the Law and Licensing Committee to study the UPAC rules, systems, processes in depth, make a comprehensive report, bring that back to the board for further action in the spring. And because there seems to be some intersection with the code of conduct that the LEAs are required to do and the UPAC concerns that the board has been addressing for a while, we ask that the committee not take action on the rule today, but rather use that in a much more deliberative process that you're going to be undertaking for the next 8 months or so as you're looking at UPAC. And then if there are any necessary changes, it would be not a standalone change, it would be part of this much more deliberate and comprehensive review and change. And that way, then all the issues that are of concern will be in alignment and will be consistent. So that's our ask for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And online, do we have a Hiram Clark or Heidi Alder? Hiram, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. My name's Hiram Clark. I'm
Oh,
an
wait.
attorney for Alpine.
Oh, wait, see, one second, Hiram. What was it? Oh, could you get closer to the microphone or just speak a little louder? Okay. Oh, there we go. So Hiram, just give us a sound check real quick.
Just put a.
Oh, that's
I
much
just put an
better.
air-
Yep.
Able to hear me better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
And we'll start
Sorry about
your 3-minute clock as soon as you start to speak.
Thank you. So as you know, my name's Hiram Clark. I'm an attorney for Alpine School District. I'm not speaking in any official capacity, but my professional experience does inform my comments today. And first, I want to thank you. The USBE is a tremendous resource to Alpine School District. Your staff have helped us resolve a number of difficult matters. There are always people on the other end of that phone that we can call. I've served on your bullying model policy work group, and I really do view this relationship as a partnership. There's no but that's coming. You know, I'm not about to say, well, you know, I do want to clearly communicate my gratitude and respect. I also want to express concern regarding R277322. In the words of suffragette Elizabeth Cady Stanton, to make laws that man cannot and will not obey serves to bring all into contempt. And that's the risk that I see here. I think the proposed rule casts such a wide net that compliance will become difficult, maybe even to the point of approaching impossibility. I also think that the current draft loses much of our existing rules precision, that it blurs the line between employees' professional and personal lives, and in some ways holds LEAs to a reporting requirement that I fear many will fall short of. I also fear that this proposed draft will give squeaky wheels center stage and redirect attention away from areas that truly need the grease. So you're already aware of fiscal impact. I'm not going to dwell on that other than to say that as Alpine School District looks ahead to the reconfiguration, that $500,000 per district will be no small matter, especially in those first few years when some of the districts are anticipated to be cash strapped. Really, these comments are not coming from a place of Madisonian democracy or fighting for every square inch of local control. I do want to emphasize that we want to be compliant. And I would ask you to please consider seeking broader feedback from LEAs statewide on Rule 322 so that we can achieve a rule that districts can realistically follow, one that can protect students and support employees and avoid inadvertently bringing the law into contempt. So thank you for your time, and please do consider not taking action on 322 today. Thank you.
Hiram, thank you. Do you mind if I ask the football helmet? Oh, I guess he.
Oh, yes, sir.
Just curious about which team you have there represented by the football helmet.
Yeah, that would be
Oh,
BYU.
I'll give extra weight to your comments today. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone
Thank you.
else, Vanessa, for public comment? Okay, Heidi's online as well. Okay,
I am.
Heidi, your 3 minutes will start as soon as you begin to speak.
Okay. My name is Heidi Alder. I also went to BYU, if that helps. And I am general counsel for Weber School District, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Weber School District and also expressing some concerns about Rule 114. But I would like really briefly to address Mr. Sanders' comments, and I appreciate his suggestion about consistency. To clarify, the law allows principals to decide whether groups have access to the newspaper, public announcements, bulletin boards, and yearbooks. Beyond that, the decision about what is a club and what is a group is based in statute, and most districts have policies that are similarly based in statute. But I don't disagree that it would be helpful if there was some consistency about what groups had access to at the schools. So at this point in time, under the law, principals do have the discretion as to decide what access groups have. And it's not just what access which groups have, it's if any group has access to the yearbook, all groups get to have access to the yearbook, at least access in terms of opportunity and offering of access to that forum. And so I do think that it would be helpful, and if any district can do this on its own. It doesn't necessarily require a law or a board rule for a district to decide, impose some uniformity and consistency across the schools in its district with regard to which activities, events groups have access to. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents to that comment. What I would actually like to address is the proposed amendments to Rule 277-114. I just have a couple of high-level overview points I'd like to make. First of all, I think that the framework that the State Board of Education staff spent over a year developing is a really wonderful framework that is a fair balance between what USBE is overseeing and control. I think that the framework is helpful. It allows USBE to determine appropriate FTEs necessary to enforce new statutory requirements. I think without a framework and with the complete oversight authority, the amount of FTEs that will be necessary to enforce that is going to increase exponentially. I also believe that there's some potential doubling up on expenditures of taxpayer dollars, where you have an oversight compliance committee and also the state superintendent seemingly able to enforce this oversight authority, impose corrective actions, and have sort of a dual responsibility. And it seems to be a doubling up of authority that isn't necessary and may be a waste of taxpayer dollars. Ultimately, the rule seems to undo all local control. And like Mr. Clark stated, I don't think any district or charter school would say that they don't want to comply. That's my entire job. I work with LEAs to ensure compliance. That's what I do day in and day out. And I don't believe that anybody doesn't want to comply or doesn't acknowledge and recognize that there's a level of oversight from a state agency that is necessary. At the same time, every LEA has an elected board that has been appointed by their taxpayers and their constituents to oversee and manage the affairs of their school district and their LEA. And I'm concerned that with the LEA being their every action potentially being subject to oversight and compliance enforcement, there is a potentially onerous document production and proof of compliance through these corrective action plans, and it really has a potential to undermine a local state board's authority. So thank you so much for allowing me to provide these thoughts.
Heidi, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Vanessa, is there anyone else for public comment? No? Anyone present? Okay, thank you. With the committee's permission, if we could just take a 5-minute recess? Any objection to that? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I want to thank everyone. Thank you for the your patience during that break. And it looks like the next item is R277-100. Deputy Newey, do you want to cue that up for us?
Sure thing. Let me also share my screen. This is a rule that passed through committee not too long ago, but after it was published, we realized that there was a comma missing. So this is really just to fix that, but because that could be interpreted as a substantial change, a comma changes meaning. That's why it's important. We wanted to make sure that this committee and the board reviewed it before making that official. So that's the only change that you'll see here.
So just for clarity, we're referring to line 19. So 18, some practices include adapting instruction to increase engagement, behavior plans, and restorative practices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can make a motion at any time.
And I'm ahead of somebody doing the screen.
Yeah, sorry. I'm
It's all right.
struggling with
I
technology.
know you're doing it all. Thanks, Elise. Let me just lip. Oh, it's coming. I move that the committee continue and approve R277. I move that the committee revise R277-100 to include parentheses C, an accountability practice. Nope, sorry, wrong one. And let's do the blue one that's outlined for me. I move that the committee approve R277-100, definitions for Utah State Board of Education rules, draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Before I call for a vote on that, I guess my question is, the language talks about, it uses the word increase. And I just have concerns about restorative practices. I know there was discussion on this last time that restorative practices are in code, so the board doesn't have the ability through rulemaking to eliminate restorative practices should it so desire. But I'm uncomfortable with the way I read this. If we were to leave the word increase there, it seems to suggest that we are directing the LEAs to do more in that area. And that's my concern. One, LEA should be free to act in what they believe is the best interest of their LEA. But two, just given the concerns that have been shared with me about restorative practices, I'd like to address the word increase. And what I wrote was, some practices include adapting instruction regarding engagement, behavior plans, and restorative practices.
If I may, Chair, I think the original intent, when I was going back and looking at the conversations when this was originally passed to make sure we were being true to what this board asked for, I believe that the increase applies to the engagement. So adapting instruction to increase engagement is one thing, behavior plans as a second thing, and then restorative practices as a third thing. So three separate, and that the increase goes with the engagement. We could definitely move this sentence around to make that more clear.
Suggestion? Or go-
Vice Chair Bollinger had her light on first, so let me go to her. and
Yeah,
then
thank you,
Board-
Chair. Yeah, I think that we could just adjust it so it says some practices include, oh, now I gotta go back to, some practices include behavior plans, restorative practices, and adapting instruction to increase restorative practices. Or, excuse me,
Engagement.
engagement, yes, thank you. So,
You wanted to increase the use of restorative practice, because you mentioned it twice.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
I caught that in the.
yeah, right? The true ones, not restorative justice, let me just be clear. That's why there's so much confusion. But yeah, so I'll make a motion to change the wording so it reads, some practices include behavior plans, restorative practices, and adapting instruction to increase engagement.
Just a grammatical suggestion. Practices may include, as opposed to some practices may include. Is that okay?
Yep.
Just want to give time for this. So once it's done, I'll give the committee time to read it. Any discussion as to the motion? Seeing none, the motion before the committee is that the committee amend lines 18 through 20 to read, practices may include behavior plans, restorative practices, and adapting instruction to increase engagement. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item before the committee is item 1.3, R277-311. Deputy. Oh, the entire, thank you. So the chair will entertain a motion from the body.
I can stick with this. All right, I would make a motion that the committee approve R277-100, definitions of Utah State Board of Education rules, draft one as amended, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-100, definitions for Utah State Board of Education rules, draft one as amended, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Deputy Newey. If we can go to item 1.3.
This is mine, Chair, if I can lead off. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. R277-311 is up for its 5-year review. So that was the impetus for bringing this to committee. The major change recommended here is in the section on physical education endorsements. Staff recommended that we add language to clarify that staff can also adopt requirements for an adapted physical education endorsement, which is needed for special education students. We have our PE specialists here if there are questions about that, but happy to take those.
While the committee's reviewing, I do have one question, Director Rasmussen, and it goes to line 31. And the way I read lines basically 29 through 44 is the way I read lines 29 through 44 is basically, if you want the endorsement in driver's education, you cannot have done the following things. And it itemizes or lists those out. Most of them are limited by time. So if you do reckless driving, you can't get the endorsement within 3 years. If you have a DUI, you can't get the endorsement within a period of time. But for line 31, it says, has not received an automobile operator's license suspension from a court for a non-traffic related issue. And we don't limit that by time. It seems like even if that were to have happened 20 years ago, it would still preclude you from getting the endorsement. That strikes me as unfair, but I don't know under which situations the operator's license suspension from a court for a non-traffic related issue may have sprung from. And so I'm just looking for guidance. I'm looking, how egregious are these offenses in order to warrant a permanent ban on your ability to get the endorsement? Because it just strikes me on its face as unfair.
Well, that would be a traffic-related issue. So I think that there would be, this would be tied to specific statutes. I don't know if Audrey Uri is online, but I know that this section of the rule is adopted in cooperation with the driver's license division. I know that that our endorsement is taken with in discussions with them. I'm not sure if there would be an issue with adding a time limit on this. But I think, you know, there would be some circumstances where a court could have discretion to do this, but most times there would be specific statutes that talk about when a suspension could be imposed. That would be a rare step for a judge to take in a non-traffic related issue, in my experience.
Right, because even for the driving under the influence or reckless driving, it's a 5-year 5-year prohibition. So I'm just trying to better understand. I will reach out to Audra and follow up with that. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Anyone ready to make a motion?
Make the motion that the committee continue and approve R277311 specialized endorsements, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277311 specialized endorsements, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All those in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. The next item is item 1.4, Local Education Agency Codes of Conduct, R277-322, and this is Director Rasmussen.
This is a board member requested agenda item, so I would probably flip it back to you since you're the sponsor.
And because of that, Vice Chair Bollinger, do you mind sitting in his chair for this rule?
Yep, I'd be happy to. And you've already read the title, so I will turn it back to you to introduce it.
Okay, thank you. So R277-322, it's my understanding, originally came from the board was told to create a code of conduct for those individuals working in a public school who may not have an educator license. And it's my understanding part of the reasoning for that was UPAC has jurisdiction over those individuals with an educator license. But as we have learned, in some schools, more than 50% of the individuals that a student may encounter may not have an educator license. And so while we build all these protections for students and guidelines for educators, there really was nothing for non-educators. So the legislature directed this body to create a code of conduct. And these are amendments to the code of conduct to bring more definition as to the expectations of the board in terms of what is permissible and is not permissible from individuals in a school when it comes to their interaction with our children and students. I do want to make sure that everyone understands that there is a draft 2 in backup. And I was advised this morning that although our board had access to draft 2 in backup yesterday because we enter the portal through a different doorway, that the public did not have and may still not have access to draft. Oh, but now it's in there. So I know that there were several concerns as individuals have reached out to me regarding draft 1, and draft 2 should have been put into backup. So please make sure that you take the time to read that, and hopefully that addresses several of the concerns. But one of the primary purposes of bringing this was to engage in the conversation. I did enjoy what Dr. Jones had to say about maybe there is an opportunity here to merge this with the time that the full board gave this body to look at our UPAC rules. I'm going to have to deliberate on that. It's a heavy lift. I think UPAC is a very big issue to get our arms around generally, and to add this to that, I worry about the time commitment. I know that all of us on this committee have many other obligations, both professionally and personally, and I want to be fair to the committee, and I know this committee wants to get this right. So I'm going to think about that. So I will if it's appropriate, let's discuss this, but my motion at the end will be that we hold off on a final vote until the end of this meeting, because I will need time just to think about the best way to proceed. So with that, questions or comments?
Okay, we'll take any comments, Member Lear.
Oh, you ready? I thinking. Those roles, they kind of switch back and forth. Right. I did read and have draft 2, and I appreciate that there were some really helpful changes. Oh, yes, ma'am. Thank you. I did read draft 2, and I appreciate that there were some helpful changes. I still feel like that maybe you can help me understand your thinking on some of the issues. And then I'm also concerned, just as a sort of a warning, or not a warning, but a harbinger, that there's some definitions that I think are missing. And I thought about actually making amendments to put in those definitions, but then decided I wanted to hear from the sponsor of this what you were thinking, because there are both colloquial definitions and legal definitions. And I didn't know, given that these are for non-classified employees and the general public, to understand the limitations. I wasn't sure which definition you wanted to use. So let me just start with that issue. On line 63 of the draft 2, there's you use the word harassment, and that's not defined. And there are multiple definitions. In fact, at the federal level, there's some sense that harassment is, and it's not an absolute, but that harassment is sometimes subsumed under the word bullying. So I think that needs to be defined. What kind of harassment do you mean? And then also line 63, discriminatory conduct. That has a technical definition, and it just has a day-to-day definition. So which one were you thinking that this would be a problem? I don't know if you want to respond every time, Joe, or if you want to just take these kind of into your thought process.
If it's, I'd prefer just to take notes
Okay.
and then think about
I'm
this
fine.
as, Okay, thank you,
Sure.
Board Member Lear.
And I'll try not to, I'm not trying to throw things at you.
Understood.
And another thing on line 75, it talks about intimidation. And that's another definition that can be a very legal definition, or it can be a very personal or colloquial definition. So I think that needs some definition. On lines 116 through 120, I think this is where, and I liked the way you modified that in the paragraph below. Shall maintain political and ideological neutrality in the classroom and in the course of professional duties. And this kind of goes to Dr. Jones's comment as well, that it's in the course of professional duties and in the classroom. And some of these professionals are not just in the classroom. We may eventually want to broaden that to the school, or in fact, many of them are not in the classroom. So we may want to broaden that to their workplace or something along those lines.
So,
I'm going to pause.
Board-
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to add to that. I know that was a concern that I had, where the original wording, and I do appreciate you adding in the classroom. My concern was, well, if they have one of these symbols or expressions on their car and it's parked on school property, then that's where I'm concerned that maybe.
And you saw the next paragraph,
Yeah.
notwithstanding.
Yes, exactly. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the clarification. I think that added some clarity to that. So I agree with that. It's better that it's clarified in this. And Chair Carey, did you want to make a comment to that?
Please. I wanted to thank Vice Chair Bollinger, and it's difficult because you do try to find this balance between an individual's professional responsibilities while they're in the classroom, where I think that ability to influence a student or is greatest, or interact with the student is greatest. But there is also responsibility for individuals when they're on school property, or even during work hours when they're not on school property. So if you read lines 116 through 124, hopefully that tier becomes more apparent, in that the classroom, we try to impose the highest degree of responsibility when you're on school property or in connection with other LEA activities. There's also a duty, but we tried to recognize that and take that into consideration with lines 121 through 124.
Yeah, I like that better.
I do have one clarifying question, and maybe this, Director Rasmussen, maybe you can help us with this, or maybe AAG Bill, I'm not sure which one would be directed to. So when we talk about anything that is partisan, symbols, if a history teacher is teaching a lesson, is talking about campaigns or political parties, how would that be interpreted in this, the way that it's currently written? Would that be a violation of this? Would we need to clarify that?
Is Ashley online? Do you know? Do we know if Ashley's online?
AAG Bill?
Yes.
There she is.
So as it's written, I think it's questionable, right? Like, I mean, you have political and ideological neutrality, which to me is very clear, right? Like you can, but by those words alone, you can teach history, you can use old political symbols without leaning one way or another, right? Like you can teach about those things in a neutral way. I think the question is then may not use, partisan or political symbols like in the classroom. That's a little tougher, right? Like if you're using those in a history context, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things as it's worded. I think there could be a potential for trouble there, but then it's also the reality of like, is someone really going to report that? I don't know.
The answer to that would be yes. So let's tighten up the language, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, and
No problem.
Chair Carey, I'm just wondering if, because I do believe it's really important to say that we maintain political and ideological neutrality. And I'm to keep that, we would have to make sure that we're not using those symbols, expressions in the classroom other than if it's a history piece. So yes, if we can clarify that language.
Something along the lines of like outside of teaching or
Or in the
instruction.
course of instruction, something
Okay.
like that might
Thank you.
Yeah.
satisfy that.
Okay, back to you,
Do you want
Member
me
Blair.
to? And I had the same question for AAGBL, interestingly. Oh, and then, okay, lines these are struck. Lines 141 plus may not, through instruction materials or symbols, actively endorse, promote, or disparage a particular partisan, religious, denominational, sectarian, agnostic, or atheistic belief. Does it come up anywhere later in the rule? So that we can guarantee that our teachers are going to be neutral in this area as well.
This language is, I think there's identical language in the educator standards. I think he struck it from this rule, but it is still in the educator standards rule.
Right, but that would apply only to licensed educators.
Yes.
So we don't have a problem with unclassified, non-classified employee disparaging a religion. I do.
Yeah,
Chair Carey, go ahead.
thank you.
But
No,
I'm sorry, I leapt to my own opinion, sorry. Chair
you
Carey.
asked the question, they're going to give the answer.
Yeah,
That makes
both.
it easier. So no, and board member, Lee, this is something that I put in, took out, put in, took out, and part of it is that the feedback that I receive is more on the items that we just discussed in lines 116 through 124. I do not get the same level of complaints or even feedback on this issue that I do the other one. And that's when I said, well, if I don't want to write rules just to write them. And so since I'm not getting that feedback, that's why I took that out. If other members are saying, no, this is an issue, then I'm happy to tweak the language and include it.
Okay.
But again, that was the reason for it.
We live in different communities. I absolutely hear this from my friends and neighbors, that there are concerns that certain religions are disparaged. We've just received, 800 emails about the disparagement of a teacher's words that were heard as a disparagement of their religion and culture. And that's a teacher, it's a licensed professional. But still, I think that many professionals or paraprofessionals in the classroom can have that same involvement with students. And interestingly, when I had Director Rasmussen's job as part of my job, I remember in the course of, and these were teachers again, in the course of 2 months, we had cases with one individual teacher who was trying to talk the 17-year-olds who he supervised to go on an LDS mission, and another individual who was supervising 16-year-olds to say, this is the dumbest thing you can ever do with your life. And just in the course of 2 or 3 months, these 2 complaints came into the office. So I think that's a really important area to add back in the interest of time and the fact that this is discussion. I'm not going to propose an amendment.
Understood.
We may want to rethink the language. I'm not saying that's perfect language, but I think the idea is important.
And it was certainly important enough to include in our educator standards, so I understand that. Thank you.
And if I may, since we're on this topic between religion and even still back on 116 to 120, just a few questions. And AG Bill, maybe just you can help me clarify. So if a teacher comes to school, if they're wearing a CTR ring, does that violate this? And or if they have like a Trump sticker on their car, would this violate the word with the way the wording is written here?
Let's see. I think the language was tightened up a little bit, right? That it was like on the political part. Let's see.
It's
In the classroom, I think tightens that up a little bit. On school property.
and
Yeah, there's some question there, I think, maybe about political bumper stickers.
She maybe hasn't seen draft 2.
Does
yeah,
lines
what's right here.
121, would lines 121 to 24 help clarify that, or do we need additional clarification?
Okay. I would say that that is a pretty good clarifying piece, honestly. I think that would probably cover the instances that you're talking about where it's a piece of jewelry or a bumper sticker, things like that. I think that that covers it pretty well.
Okay, thank you. You have
Yeah,
additional? Go
I
ahead,
have
member
about
Lair.
3 more.
Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
and I don't, some of them are just more technical. I think that on line 160, it talks about the responsibility, LEAs or a school's responsibility for contractors. And let me just say, I think that can be worded a little more smoothly, whereas we don't need to have, provisions in their contracts because sweepers don't have contracts with schools usually. And we could certainly say that the contractor has to act consistently with the employer's code of conduct while he's at work or
I,
she's at work. So I won't belabor that too much.
Member Lear, if I may, Director Rasmussen, was that language pulled from the original existing? The reason this all appears as new language is because a lot of the language was taken from 322 but tweaked. Was that contractor language in the original 322 that if the LEA contracts, then those subcontractors or contractees also need a code of conduct policy?
I just did a quick search of the document. I don't see that that language was stricken out anywhere.
Okay.
So this would be new language.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Lear. I just wanted to know where I could go back to see the best way to rephrase that.
Okay, I just have a couple more. And again, in spirit of discussion, and I appreciate your responses and your thoughtfulness about this. On line 188, of course, this is simpler, but it talks about LEA superintendent. Also, it should talk about or director. I think the language ought to extend to charter schools as well. I'm looking, was a big concern. It was mentioned this morning by the two attorneys who spoke. Lines 194 through 197 and 200 and then on, and then also 231 and on. These are, I think, pretty onerous burdens on LEAs. And I'm wondering, hoping maybe that we can look for a way to simplify that. I'm just going to read an example. Shall annually submit to the superintendent and the board's internal audit department aggregate data on code of conduct complaints, categories of violations, and the categories are unknown there. What do we mean by categories? And dispositions. So what came of it, even if it was a verbal correction or a question to the employee. So I just think I hope we can revisit that section and not make the tracking of salaried, hourly employees, in many cases, part-time employees, a full-time job for someone in an LEA. And that was really my final comment, except to say, I'm concerned that this code of conduct as it existed is only a year old. And I know that the previous AAG was diligent about, I asked her actually very specifically, did you check and see if every single LEA did this code of conduct? And she did indeed. And the training that was developed related to this code of conduct by the USBE. So now we will be throwing, I think, some differences, not dramatically, but significantly different, at LEAs, 160 of them, to then revise their own codes of conduct. And I hope we have that provision in there too, that allows them to create something that's more strict, if they choose, and with their own twists and turns to it. So we'd be asking them to then do another code of conduct consistent with a different model policy and revise their training. So I think that's a big lift for LEAs, and that concerns me. I don't know how we'll resolve it if the board thinks that it's urgent in making these changes, but that's a concern for the burden that puts on LEAs. Those were my comments. Thank you. Thanks for your responses and others.
Chair Carey, did you want to respond to that at all? Or
I
just-
did, and it is something that as we drafted this, we wanted to take that into consideration, and maybe just for the edification of the committee and those who may be listening, we really tried to divide up the reporting into two areas. One that was more intense and one that was less intense, because we did want to be cognizant of the reporting duties that this rule would create. So on lines 203 to 213, and I see that lines 211 and 213 I thought they were going to be removed from this, but again, we tried to get this posted before today. But the first reporting requirements would be if you're terminated for one of these three reasons, you would have to provide our internal audit committee with additional information, a name, a social security number. There is no Cactus account for these individuals because they're not licensed educators. And we limited it to these three areas because we really wanted to see if we have a problem. And when I say problem, one of the issues that we have is because there's no way to track non-educators effectively, you could have an educator act inappropriately, sometimes in a minor way, sometimes in a substantial way. And that individual may be terminated, or they may just get out of Dodge before there can be any accountability. That individual will then go to another school, public, charter, private, and they go into that school, and the new school may not have any indication of their prior history because, again, there's no Cactus number, there's no system. And having spoken with individuals in our audit and other areas, this isn't hypothetical. It happens that we have individuals who, I forget who said this, but they said, why do you rob banks? And the response, well, that's where the money is. And we have individuals who I think go to these schools to target them because, was it Al Capone? Oh, well, that certainly fit that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this isn't happening in our schools, and we want to know the extent. And so there were two different reporting requirements. One, more information when there is a code of conduct violation for sexual conduct violations, and that could be termination or resignations. And you'll see those categories there. And then there's an aggregate reporting procedure, and that's for everything else. We don't need a name. We don't need a social. We just want to know, is this happening? The feedback that I have received, and it seems to make sense to me, is if we really are trying to identify, is there a problem? And if so, how widespread? That maybe in this first iteration, we really don't, we don't need the aggregate data. But again, I want time to process that and think through it. But I wanted to make it clear that there are two separate reporting requirements within this draft and the rationale behind those. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may ask a clarifying question on intent. So with that, when you're talking about the reporting, so typically in a school district, if there's a concern with an employee, their immediate supervisor will address that. So is the intent that anytime they even have like a verbal warning or a discussion about anything, even if it didn't necessarily, like it's questionable, but maybe didn't completely, require a job action like reprimand, would the intent be that then they would have to report it to their LEA, and then the LEA would have to report it to USBE for every single incident Can you
No.
help me understand that?
A great question, and thank you, Vice Chair. The analogy would be, we have a letter, if this were an educator, you would have a letter of warning and then a letter of reprimand. We are looking for those incidents that would trigger a letter of reprimand. Letter of warning is, well, we don't know if they violated a provision or not. This would be very similar. I'm not looking for, well, was it or was it not a violation? I'd rather have that clarity of saying, no, this was a violation of the code of conduct.
Okay, so just to rephrase, so because typically if it's a letter of reprimand that goes in their file in HR at an LEA, then it's at that point that that would trigger a report to USBE.
Under the draft that we have in front of us today, yes, that is the intent, and the language should reflect that. Yeah, and if we need to tighten that language, certainly do. Again, the primary purpose is to identify if there is an issue with our public schools and this happening or not. Right now, we just have no way of knowing. We have anecdotal evidence that may come into the hotline, and that's the extent, or when we hear something as board members, but there really is no way to determine, one, is there an issue, and if so, the breadth and scope. And this hopefully will help us get that information.
Thank you. And maybe this question, AAG Bill, you can help me understand. So when we're talking about lines 203 through 206, and I appreciate adding in the sexual conduct provision, because that is something that obviously we really want to make sure we don't have individuals in our schools that are violating these provisions. My question would be is, what would happen in a circumstance where if somebody resigns, it may impact the ability to investigate, and we don't know for sure if it happened or didn't happen? How would that be interpreted under this? What would an LEA be responsible for, reporting or not reporting?
I think the language in B covers that, where it says resigns or retires in lieu of termination for conduct that violates sexual conduct provisions. The sticky point there legally is violates, right? Like you're saying, if they don't have time to fully investigate, then the school might not have the evidence that it was violated. They might suspect. But I think if they're resigning in lieu of termination for, something that's under investigation or suspected, I still think that would probably fall under that subsection for where the LEA would be reporting it.
Okay, so just to follow up, so that would allow still for due process to make sure that it was a violation? Or
Yes.
If I may,
Chair
Vice
Carey, go
Chair.
ahead.
Again, that's something we also looked at, and I should stress, so this information will be reported. And then there was a very good question about, is this information grammable? So we get all this information, I say all, and I just mean we get these reports in. Now we have a list of people who really didn't have a hearing. There was no adjudication of whether something happened or not. We owe them a duty of care. And so I wanted to make sure that this information was not grammable. And I was advised by staff, in particular Director Rasmussen, he can correct me if I get this wrong, but we have the ability to mark that list private. And it's my understanding that if we do that, it is not subject to GRAMA. Is that correct?
Director Rasmussen?
Oh, sorry. Thank you,
I
Vice Chair.
believe that's correct, yes.
So follow up to that. So if we're keeping this list of names and individuals, and let's say an LEA is going to go and hire somebody, will they be able to get access to that list to see if they've jumped ship from one LEA to another? Or can you help me understand, like, what would be that process?
The current rule doesn't have that mechanism. We'd have to figure out whether or not the board wants to make that available to LEAs. You can share public, or you can share private information with other agencies or LEAs. So that's something the board could authorize if they wanted to create a mechanism for that. But the way it's currently written, I don't see that mechanism.
Okay, because my understanding is we want to make sure that they're not going from one to the next. So what I'm wondering is if it's reported to USBE, but it stays there and a new LEA is hiring and there's no information given to them, it may not still prevent what you're hoping to prevent is them jumping ship. So just something to consider. Member Leary?
I had two more things, and one related to this.
If I may respond to the vice chair. So originally, that was included in the draft, that I wanted the ability for LEAs to contact this organization and find out. But until the legislature provisions this body with the necessary funding, our capacity is limited to gathering this information. And that is why I hope, and I know members of the committee also were asking for more FTEs, because right now we are just in well, let's see the nature and scope of the issue. And I think there's wisdom in that too. If we don't see the need, so to say, maybe we don't require the funding that I think that we may. So I'm not trying to build a system for an issue that may not exist. But it was there after speaking with Director Rasmussen, A.E. Davis. We said, well, let's do this step first. Let's get a handle on, is this an issue or isn't it? And if it is, then we can move forward. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, Member Leary, did you want to follow?
I did. I had two more things. One of the things I think we're overlooking, and it could be if we, as I hope, we can spend more time on this rule and get it a little cleaner and make sure it's not too burdensome. One of the things that I think is overlooked is the legislature 10-ish years ago actually put in a provision in the law that requires a prospective employer in the public school system to contact the former employer, and it stops there. There's no penalty for the former employer not responding, but at least the prospective employer has to contact the former employer. And my feeling is I would rather have this rule reiterate, emphasize, provide training, something to strengthen, to LEAs, to encourage them to strengthen their employment practices, because that's purely an employment issue with salaried employees. This is not a licensing issue. So I would prefer that approach, and that law is there to use and to encourage LEAs to use and toward that same end, not allowing one more LEA to hire a serial offender. So I think that would be my preference in making this so, because it also keeps the employment issues at the LEA level where they belong. My second comment is maybe leaving me. Hang on, just give me 1 second to reflect. And I can't remember. So anyway, that was a concern. So with that, I don't know if we can, if you want to just defer our vote till the end of the meeting, or if you want a motion.
Yeah, I actually have a few things that I'd like to address.
well, then,
And if you think of the one that you
I'm
forgot, you
sure
let
I
us
will.
know. A couple questions I have. One, we kind of already started talking about the LEA responsibility to collect data and to report. I know right now we've seen a lot of complaints about the amount of money we're paying into administration in our schools. And so, but anytime we have a reporting requirement, it increases the need for oversight at a LEA. So it increases their need to have more administration to make sure that this happens. So that's one of the concerns that I currently have with the way it's written. And we've kind of talked about there's a fiscal note attached for what it could cost a district. And I'm very concerned about that because I worry about, and I talked about unfunded mandates yesterday, I really worry about requiring things, but then not giving the districts the funds to make sure that it happens. And although, yes, districts have money, but that money, I just feel like the more things we put onto the districts, the more money is taken away from the classrooms and the teachers. And I would really, when we give districts money, even if it's WPU, anytime we give an unfunded mandate, in my opinion, it feels like it takes away the money we can do for programs and things in the classroom and for teachers. So that's something for us to maybe consider if there was a way to streamline, make it, I mean, of course, right? If it was an SIS, then maybe that would be helpful, but just something to consider as we're moving forward with that. And I don't know if you want to respond to that or if you want me to keep going. Okay.
Please
Okay.
continue.
The other question I had was, and maybe CAE Davis, if you can help us understand the role of internal audit with this, with the helping keep a database, what that would look like. Is that the role of, does that fit under the role of audit, or is that more of an agency thing? If you can just maybe help us understand that specifically.
Sure. So, Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis. It's an interesting question because you have management, the superintendency that is responsible for daily management operations, and internal audit is intended to be independent of that so that if need be, we could come back and audit it. So the question, what would internal audit kind of be doing in this space if we're receiving data? And I will say, I think it could be a management responsibility. I think there is space under the professional internal auditing standards that, I know, that internal audit could help in this space, as we are required under our professional standards to evaluate risk and internal control systems and things like that. So as long as we're not doing this, one of those daily management operations, and it's more like, hey, we're doing this so we can assess risk and provide information to the board, then I feel like it's an okay thing for internal audit to do. Of course, at the board's discretion, that's something you think would be beneficial for us to use our time on. It is, as has been mentioned, with the hotline, we do get some information. So there's already like some interaction there that's happening. And since we already have that information, maybe there's an efficiency with us collecting and tracking data in that space as well. So I don't know, did that answer the question just as far as roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, it did. And I think that you hit on exactly right. Like there is a management component to that. And so I don't know if it's better to be under USBE management, where then you could audit could actually audit if we're doing that process correctly. You know what I mean? So you have an extra layer of, is this being reported? Are we collecting the data as we should? And to the point of monitoring, I know that currently we've had, I mean, it's one of our strategic plan goals is to improve our monitoring systems. And I know there's a plan for that within USBE. So if we're developing, here's some monitoring, would this fall under, I just asked myself or question, would this be another monitoring thing that's best served there with then the potential to audit that if it's happening correctly? And that's where I'm kind of blurring the lines.
Right, absolutely. I will say one consideration, whoever does this, is the reliability of the data. And we know right now there is a critical and pervasive issue, a concern with data reliability. So however and whoever sets this up absolutely has to come in with a plan for data management so that this is usable and you can analyze the data that will be received so that there's benefit that can be achieved there. Because we, with the audits, the analysis that we do now, we spend an inordinate amount of time just trying to clean data and norm it. And even then, there's still a little bit of question if what we're bringing to board, like, this is what we're seeing based on what we're trying to do. But so I would just caution whoever's doing it, the data management is going to be critically important.
Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up on that, I do think that kind of also goes along with the concern that Member Lear talked about, is the training. So training of, having a system set up here, but then also training all the way down to an LEA level and even down to an employee level to make sure that they understand. And I know that there's some provisions in here for some training. I think that's going to be really important. Another thing, I just want to make sure,
Yeah.
does anybody have any follow-up to those things?
No, I have my thought.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Member Lear.
Make sure you use your microphone right. Again, in the spirit of discussion, I recalled the other issue, and the point I wanted to make is, if you look at any criminal law or cases, which I know Director Rasmussen does now on occasion, it would be noteworthy how many people are convicted of disorderly conduct. And that encompasses a whole lot of things, but I'm looking at this sexual conduct required to be reported. Usually that doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we also need, I think, to be really aware of the employees we're talking about. I was visiting a school with a assistant superintendent of Granite School District and the principal, and we were in an elementary school, and the assistant superintendent said, this is where I started my work life as a sweeper when I was 14. So these are individuals who come and go, and it's not, some of them are more permanent than others, but many of them are very mobile and part-time employees. So I think that it would be very easy for an LEA to tell someone, if they tell them, give them a reason at all, that we don't need you as a sweeper because you're disruptive or you're not fitting in with students. So I don't want to create such a sort of ominous reporting category that LEAs are tempted to minimize. I'd rather work on the training, and which brings me to one last point, and that is, interestingly, in the statute that required this code of conduct, which is not in the education code, it was for all government employees with a specific section for the educators. It also requires training. It requires the code of conduct, and it requires LEAs to provide training, and the USBE provided that training to be used if they chose by LEAs. And that really is all I have.
Did you want to follow up on that, Chair Karen?
If I could. And, I was asked at the beginning, what was the intent or purpose of this proposed draft? And it is, at the end of the day, it's to protect our students. And I know everyone on this committee shares that. The risk is always when you start an endeavor like this, there's a tendency that we don't recognize, or maybe even the broader community, is that there's a lot going right in our public schools, a lot. And when you zero in on this, and Board Member Lear's comment, this just came to mind, is that, and that's why I've tried to reiterate that this is designed to protect students. And I think the best way to do that without making it seem like this is happening everywhere is to really just start the process of what's the best way to gather the data on those serial or egregious examples where an individual is abusing the system by just flying under the radar. And that's really what this was designed to do. And I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the feedback. Again, I'll defer to the vice chair, but if I could just have time to consider it, and then the best way forward. This is listed as an action item, but I want to make clear to the board, because the deference was given instead of making motions in real time, I would request that the vice chair, we just bring this back next month as an action item, because the courtesy was extended not to make these motions, so I don't want to say, well, I'm just going to move it up anyway and have everyone scramble. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And I just have two other things I just want us to be able to have some discussion about, and then I think we'll be ready for a motion for exactly what you're talking about. And I appreciate, this is great to be able to have this discussion. On lines 163 through 165, it talks about an LEA establishing a hotline for students, parents, and personnel to report violations of board rule, LEA policy, and including code of conduct. And so, Chair Kerry, I would defer to you on this question. Is the purpose, because typically and I know Audit even has a great visual on their website that says, here's how you handle complaints, and that's typically go to the teacher first or your local principal first, right? Like handle at a local level. When I read this, it makes me think that we're then encouraging them to report. And I get that with the understanding of a violation of teaching practice, right? We have the hotline that's required by law for that it is required. But if a LEA or even a school has to have a specific, or an LEA has to have a hotline, I'm curious to know, is the intent then, so then the it go, so the district's aware of that, or is the intent for would that go down to the administrator so they can actually deal with that? That's where I'm a little worried about the wording here on the flow, because it kind of is, if a principal doesn't know about something that is happening, they can't address it. So I'm a little worried that if we're encouraging parents or students to go straight to a hotline instead of going to the person that can actually do something and do the investigation, and it will delay the process of having it to go from a hotline, and then the district has to have a process for then it to come back to an administrator. I'd much rather be like, here's the flow chart, go straight to the problem so it can be addressed quickly in a timely manner. So can you help me understand the intent of this portion?
Yeah, thank you. Another great question. So the request is just for them to establish a hotline. That hotline, it's my understanding, can piggyback off of our existing hotline, or as the rule require, they have the discretion to set up their own. And one thing I really appreciate, and I believe this suggestion came from Board Member Hall and was implemented by CAE Davis, was that if you visit our hotline page now, I believe there's an infographic. And I know that because I'm not a big reader, and I was like, oh, this makes it very simple to follow. But it says at the very top, like, hey, the procedure isn't that you should call here first. It's go to your local school. So even if they do reach out to our hotline, the first instruction they get is you don't have to, but you really should go local.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So this is basically, I mean, I like the idea of it being piggybacked on the same hotline. I just didn't want them to have a couple hotlines or different processes. But also, I can see the need if they go to their local principal or teacher and feel like it's not being addressed, it also gives them an opportunity to address that. One other question, and this is back even just to the wording in the rule, down on, or I guess up on 109 through 110. An AAG build, maybe this question will go to you. So it says, shall act professionally and in a manner that upholds the integrity of the school and the public education system, whether on or off duty. So if a teacher wears a tank top or a tube top that you cannot wear, it's not professional, and they're off duty. I'm just curious to know where this language concerns me a little bit. Obviously, we want our educators and all of our employees to have integrity and be professional. I'm just curious, there's a lot of things that are not okay in a school setting, but I also don't want to cross over and hold all of the people working in public education to a way higher standard than anybody else in our community, to be in a professional standard at all times. So can you help me interpret that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I would have a little bit of concern the way that's worded. I think, you have First Amendment rights, especially outside of your employment, and that extends not just to your speech, but to your action, right? And like the things that you're choosing to do and how you express yourself. And so if someone wants to, I don't know, travel to Cancun and get rip-roaring drunk on the weekend, like that might not be something that's considered professional, but is certainly within their First Amendment rights to do. So I think, I don't know if there's a way to shore that up a little bit, but there are ways in which like conduct can be managed more when they're on campus or in their career as an educator versus at all times existing as an adult who also happens to be a teacher.
Okay, thank you. That helps. So let's just hear Carrie, just something else to consider as we move forward.
Yeah, if I may respond, I did go back and forth on this, but then I think, teachers want to be professionals. I have heard it come from this body. I've heard it come from educators, and they look at it as a profession, and it is. And, as an attorney, we sign on to the understanding that our conduct, whether we're in court acting as attorneys or not, we're still subject to the same code of ethics. Police officers, whether they're on duty or off duty, they have a code of conduct that applies to them. And so in terms of profession, that's one of the definitions of profession, is that there's an expectation that you will be professional, whether you're in the classroom or outside of the classroom. I understand the ambiguity that could give rise yesterday in our board meeting. there was a comment about somebody using profanity. And the response was, well, when did that become, right? These are my words. But I was like, well, that's an interesting, right? I understand the ambiguity that can arise from this, but I do think that it's okay to say, yes, there's an expectation if you're in a profession that you will act professionally, not just when you're on the clock, but just in general. But I'm happy to speak with counsel, and if there's a way to tweak that, I'm happy to look at that.
Member Lear. Sorry, we're just piggybacking off.
Yes,
the
we are. Well, it gives me new thoughts. And this illustrates.
That's very unprofessional. You said your last question like
I
three
know,
times in a row
I
now,
know,
so-
I know. Lie, right?
Yeah.
There was a speaker this morning who talked a little bit about this, and I agree with you absolutely, Chair Carey, when it comes to licensed individuals. They're professionals. But this rule is primarily, I understood, for the employees. And I've always in my head, and I don't think it's just, maybe it's old fashioned, but I don't think it's made up, is that there's a distinction between the professionalism of a licensed teacher and a part-time 15-year-old sweeper. And so that's why I'm particularly also troubled by the on or off duty. Because though I may agree that a teacher should be held to a higher standard, which I may or may not, I go back and forth on that too. But I very much do not believe that a part-time employee, especially younger, especially untrained, especially not trained in the specific requirements of being a teacher, should not be held to this standard. And that's where I think this rule conflates with the UPAC rules, and we should examine them together.
Okay. All right, Chair Carey, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah.
Or actually, did you have something?
Just real
Oh,
quick.
yep.
Yeah. No,
Member Hall.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate all the discussion around this. And I appreciate the heart and the spirit behind it. I think it's very good. I'm thankful that as a committee, we're willing to continue to work on this to try to bring it to the place that it needs to be. Because when I look at this, it's more than just, like you said, code of conduct. It's safeguards, right? It's fortifying these safeguards around our kids, which is so important. So I hope that we'll continue the work to get this across the finish line and do what it takes. But I just wanted to say I'm grateful for the conversation we've had, and I love the direction that's beginning to go. So.
Okay.
So
Chair Carey.
yeah, and my motion would be along the lines of to bring this back to law and licensing next month. And that the discussions continue between now and then. And that would be the end of the motion, but I would just add that it doesn't mean that it has to come back. But I want to leave that on the table if this committee is so willing to pass the motion. But that gives some certainty to the timeline and the process. But because it says that the item will come back, I don't want to leave the committee with the impression that it must come back, if that makes sense. But it could, it may not. But rather than just saying it's out there, this allows us to keep track of it, to move it forward. But as I told Dr. Jones, I really do want to think about the wisdom. And that means I see the parallels between UPAC and what we're doing here, but I truly want to consider, and we'll speak to each board member of this committee about the burden that will be on this committee should we combine it. And so, thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay. Member
To the
Lear?
motion?
Yep.
I would support a motion that leaves that when it comes back open-ended, because I believe rather than being burdensome on this committee or the board, it would rather allow us to look at two very closely related issues side by side and make sure they're consistent, make sure that what we're doing for primarily non-licensed individuals is fair and perhaps a little different than what happens for licensed individuals. And so my preference would to be to consider those things together. We have a decent code of conduct now. We have training. We have every LEA abiding by it as of a year ago. So I feel like we have something good in place, but I absolutely acknowledge the board's and the board members' right to change things or make suggestions. So I support this, but I would like to delay this and make sure there's consistency. Even when it was written, I remember thinking, isn't this kind of duplicative with our UPAC rules? And we actually have another rule about, the board has another rule about non-licensed employees and their requirements. Not a code of conduct, but it exists. So I don't think a lot of duplication is necessary. Thanks.
Okay. So the motion is that the committee bring this item back to Law and Licensing in the November committee meeting to continue discussion.
May.
Did you want to change, Chair Carey? Looks like you're ready to add to that conversation. Did you want to clarify in the motion?
No, I see what Member Lear is saying, that the committee. Yeah, I think this is fine because let's bring it back and this body eventually will decide on which direction it goes at that time. I would just change it to say item to in the November committee meeting. Right, to continue discussion, but I also want to leave open the possibility that to continue discussion and to take an action as the committee may decide.
Or do you want it to just say and possible action?
Or possible action. That's
I think that will help clarify that it could be listed as an action item and not a discussion item.
and that's really what I was aiming for. So thank you, Vice Chair. But again, I want to stress that, and I appreciate the feedback. I thought all of it was very, very helpful, and I think that demonstrates the wisdom and power of discussion before action. And so I appreciate the committee and the time. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I will go ahead and read that and we'll take a vote. The motion is that the committee bring back this item to Law and Licensing in the November committee meeting to continue discussion or possible action. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any opposed? All right, that motion is unanimous. Okay, Chair Carey, back to you.
Thank you. So I think that the next item is 111 and 114. And having answered questions for the last 40 minutes, is it okay if we take a 10-minute break just so I can reset? I don't know how staff does it from motion to motion, but I can't. So we'll take a 10-minute recess. Thank you. And it looks like we have two more action items. R277-111, which is item 1.5, and then item 1.6, R277-114. Again, these are my requests, and because of that, I will relinquish the chair to Vice Chair Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, let's make sure we get to the right item. So we are on action item 1.5, R277-111, Board Oversight Framework. And it looks like this is to repeal. So Chair Carey, if you would like to speak to this.
Yeah, so 111 and 114 are related. They're joined at the hip. 111 is, it has a monitoring component, but is primarily the establishment of the categories that we use on our rules. And so 111 would just be an outright repeal, which would end the categorization system that we currently have, but the monitoring components of 111 have been shifted to 114, and that's why it would just be an outright repeal and no replacement. So I would suggest that unless the committee or board member feels otherwise, and you're free to ask, but 114 is where the changes are, and the discussion may be more productive, but I'm happy to entertain questions on either.
Thank you, Chair. And my question and my thought is, if I'd be concerned about voting on this about a repeal unless we know what we're doing with the monitoring. So I'm wondering if there's an appetite from this committee to potentially move this one till after our discussion of 114, depending on what comes of that. Is that something that you might be open to, Chair Carey?
I think that would be the best path forward.
Okay, so with that, if there's no objection, we'll go ahead and move that item to the end and we'll move forward. Okay, so we will move to action item 1.6, R277-114, response to compliance and related issues. And Chair Carey, if you would like to speak to that.
I would, thank you. And again, I would just ask the committee, there is a draft 2 in backup, and so I know that that creates, could create some issues if someone worked off draft 1, but there is a draft 2, and that'll be the draft that I am working off of. When you open that draft up, you will see, because this is a repeal and replacement, reenact, a repeal and reenact, you will see that the first draft of 114, the current draft, is struck, and you have to scroll to the bottom of that to see the reenact portion. There we go. And if I may, I would just again start out with the purpose, and the reason that I'm proposing these revisions are twofold. And when we first discussed about, I'll say 2 years ago, the revisions to 111 and 114, it was to offer clarity to the board, to the legislature, and to individuals in the field about our priorities. My experience in speaking with all 3 of those groups is that we have not achieved the clarity that we sought, but we also have failed in terms of accountability and oversight. And as I have met with staff extensively on this, the 2 messages that come out is, one, we are sending the wrong message to individuals in the field. And what I mean by that is category 1, as it has been designated by this board, would generally mean there is minimal monitoring. And we even came up with a phrase for that. I think we call it desktop monitoring, which means, in theory, there's someone who looks and says they should be doing this, and we're not going to go visit them, but we may call, we may send an email, and they'll let us know how that's working out. And there's a slight variation between that and category 2, but primarily it's nominal or minimal oversight. And then as you go to 3 and 4, that escalates in nature. How we determine those categories should be based on several factors. And one is how much staff do we have devoted to that particular rule? How much money does that particular program receive from USBE to conduct monitoring? But as I looked into that, it became clear that even though those were the items that the category should be based on, there really was no sync between those factors. And there was a time when I would ask staff as they were presenting, why are you a category 1? How much money does your program receive? How much time do you spend on monitoring? And the staff over the program couldn't answer those questions effectively. And that's what really got me thinking that maybe there is no science behind this category system. And when the sensitive materials bill first came up before this body, it was a category, I believe, 2. And there was pushback saying, wait, these are sensitive materials. We have to, like, it has to be more than that. And so when the body, before we went to lunch, it was a category 2. By the time we came back from lunch, it had magically raised to a category 4. And if it was really based on all these fixed criterion, how is that possible? Right? Like, did we give more money to the program over lunch? Did we hire more staff to monitor the program? And I think it's a convenient system, but I don't think it's effective. And so then I started speaking with staff about, okay, so the categories, there's no science there, so why are we doing this? Then I started to hear from staff, and I don't want to, and I know some members, not on this committee, but in the board generally, reached out and said, you know, staff really likes this, staff wants this. So I asked staff, is this working for you? And the answer was yes, but for an unexpected reason. And what staff said was, it allows us to know how we should spend our time. And I said, what do you mean? How does that play out? And they said, well, we know if it's a category 1 and we really get busy, that's something we don't have to dive into right then. And as we talked and as we explored, and I give these individuals credit, even though they can't be named, they said, well, what it means is that we don't have to get to it. And I also heard from others that the message that the field sometimes hears is that, thank goodness this is a category 1 or a category 2, because that means USBE isn't going to show up at our door and say, why aren't you doing these things? I don't think that's the message or certainty that this board intended when we passed these rules. But that's the feedback. And I understand we pass too many rules. Elise, what is that committee? It used to be the reports committee. What is that committee called now?
I just want to make sure it's on record that Chair Carey said we have too many rules.
No. Well, yes, we'll get there. What is that committee called? The Accountability, I'm sorry, Vice Chair.
Accountability and Transparency Committee. It was the Reports and Requirements Task Force for a very long time, and they have since rebranded in the last 2 months.
So, right, so now everybody's accountability. So, but we just had this meeting, and it was clear that the field is saying we cannot do everything that the legislature wants us to do. We cannot keep up with the rules that USBE is passing. And it got me thinking that, okay, so how do we fix that? Because I think we all recognize it. I think we all recognize it is not, we don't have to say it's not sustainable, it's broken. So what happens is we say we're going to pass this rule. And I've said it before, nobody can pass rules like this body. We are tops in that category. We send this rule out to the field knowing that we are not going to get compliance. The LEAs received this rule, and they know they can't comply because they don't have the funding, they don't have the human power, like the manpower, the employees to do what we're asking them to do. And it's almost like theater. We pass a rule and say they're going to follow it. LEAs say we're going to follow this rule. Then we don't monitor it. They don't do it. And what happens? The legislature says, we told you to do this. You're not doing it. And what do? Well, we're going to pass another law to make sure that you're doing what the last law told you to do. And we saw that play out in the admin rules hearing last week. And I think it was Bremer who said, how many laws do we have to pass to get you guys to do what we want you to do? And I'm thinking, it's not that people, and it was said earlier, I think it's rare to get willful noncompliance. But we have to create a system where compliance is possible. And that is my hope here. Because I truly believe that if we get compliance with the rules that we have passed and we eliminate the burden and requirement of unnecessary rules, I think compliance goes up. And I know that may strike some as counterintuitive, but the best atmosphere that we can create for LEAs is to give them a wide berth and then get out of their way. You have trained educators, you have trained teachers, you have trained administrators, and overwhelmingly, I believe they want to do the right thing for the right reason. And as I meet with teachers, I would say the number one concern they have about the profession is they can't teach. That they're always in this sense of we need to comply, and what do we have to comply with today? So know that the purpose for these revisions is to get the compliance that is required by law with the hope that this will lead to less rules instead of more. And then finally, as I talked to staff, two things became clear. And again, I'm going to ask Board Member Hall and CAE Davis, but when I asked if we had a compliance problem, and this was with the members of the superintendency, I asked if we had a compliance problem at USBE, and their response was, we do not have a compliance problem, we have a defiance problem. And again, I think it is rare for someone to willfully say, we're not going to do this. But there are lots of examples of where we have requested compliance with an existing rule or corrective action plan. And I wrote a couple of the responses down. But the one that really surprised me the most is when a member of our superintendency, because it had escalated to that point, was told, you'll get it when we're ready to give it. And it is not fair that our staff are treated that way, and the amount of time that we lose because we have to go and beg and plead for data or information that they are required to provide. It just leads, it's this cascading effect of inefficiency. And then they're not efficient and we're not efficient. That is what I'm trying to accomplish here. So thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And Member Hall, did you want to add to that?
I do. You know, I know it's a sensitive area. And if there's anybody who loves to give a lot of grace, it's me. I love to just be gracious with people. And having a chance to be able to work in audit, it just really opened my eyes to this very issue when it comes to noncompliance. It's not just, I mean, even when a response is warranted, you could respond. You know what I mean? Don't take 30, 40, 50, 60 days and not even respond. what it did to me was allow me to be able to see that it slows down the work of our staff. We have a tremendous staff here at USBE, and they want to get the work done. They want to get the information that's necessary. But there are when there are schools, when there are LEAs that are not compliant, it really slows down the work. And this is how you know it is defiance in many areas, is because, and I know people are sick of me saying this, but OLAG doesn't have this issue. When OLAG comes to do an audit, they get the information, and they get it quickly. And listen, I know some people that are on OLAG, and that's exactly what happens. And it's because they know that the LEA knows that they mean business. And I believe we do too at USBE, but we need to be able to enhance this structure to be able to maybe get compliance to come a little bit easier. And like Member Carey said, we're not looking at every area. These are in some of the big areas when it comes to some of our LEAs. So CAE Davis is here. I know. Why don't you just come on up? Just I think it's important. And you know what, Deputy Superintendent Jones, if he were here, he could come up and testify as well. There are so many things that are backlogged in our system because we can't get LEAs to respond in these areas. They're not compliant. So I think this is a really important rule as we move forward. I know there's going to be a lot of things we talk about here, but I think maybe just if you would, CAE Davis, just maybe a little testimony about that. I really appreciate all the great work that audit does. I know this slows them down tremendously because there's not compliance. So feel free to speak from your heart. I don't want to coerce, or just feel free to feel free to speak from your heart about this issue.
CAE Davis, go ahead.
Okay, Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis. Really, I could just say ditto, and that's accurate, and I wouldn't need to say anything else, but maybe just an example on an audit we are currently working on. We did have one LEA that when we asked for information, they said, we can get that to you in December, so just mark us down as we're not going to provide it. So those are some of the things we run into as we're trying to get data so that we can do the audits that the board has approved or requested. Of course, we maintain the public education hotline. We see a lot, and they come in as allegations. But even when I was speaking with, who was it? It's the governor's senior education advisor, Rich Nye, he had indicated, he's like, oh, sometimes principals just don't know that it's in the law that you have to reasonably accommodate parents. And so we have to educate. And so there's a non-compliance until you can educate. So we're aware that it happens, that it's out there, that there's a lot of room to improve in this space. So I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
May I would like to ask a follow-up question, because one of the things, we did a lot of work on 123 to give deadlines and responses to some of these hotline issues. Because there's specific deadlines for responses, has that helped in getting responses from districts to have specific deadlines and date requirements?
Okay, well, based on the amendments to R277-123 last December, which rolled out and said, hey, within 45 days, then LEA needs to provide an update or a summary to us, the compliance rate with that requirement was about 53%. So we did have a number of LEAs that just simply did not respond. At that point, there was not an enforcement mechanism necessarily, and the board was actively working to amend the rule again, so we didn't really push that. Of course, the board in June amended the rule. We have pretty much implemented just about all of it starting September 1st. We've got the training out there. We've told them there's deadlines for reporting. Some LEAs are really getting back to us. There are others that have not yet, but we haven't hit the 45-day yet. So about October 15th, you'll start to know whether or not we're getting the responses that are required. And if not, you will also start getting notifications and you'll get a board member report that's required as well to see that information.
That's helpful. Thank
So
you.
can I
Member
just
Da-
follow up to
yeah,
that
Member Lair.
quickly, and then I had one other comment. So I think I hear you saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I hear you saying we really haven't had time to understand and let the requirements of 123 play out. Is that you're saying that we'll know more in a month or two, or come October, mid-October? Is that right?
Yes, with the latest iteration of amendments that became effective in August, September, yes.
Okay.
Yes, mid-October we anticipate we'll have a lot more
Right.
data
So
on
we
that.
might have some improvements there, right?
We don't know yet, but
Yeah,
yes, we'll
we
see.
might, if
About
we're
2
being
weeks.
hopeful, yes.
Yes.
Okay, my other clarification or clarifying question to probably Chair Carey or maybe Member Hall mentioned it also, is you mentioned that you think there's an attitude of defiance as opposed to compliance. And I was confused because at one point you were talking about talking to USBE staff, and I wasn't sure if you said that this, if you were saying that this defiance is among USBE staff members or if it's from LEAs.
Chair Carey.
No, thank you. No, those weren't my words. That's what was said in a meeting that I attended with members of the superintendency, that there are not a compliance, but a defiance.
Right.
And they were referring to
LEAs.
in the field.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was unclear and I wanted to. Okay. Yeah, I've heard that person say that also. Thank you.
And if I just may speak to this for a moment, I appreciate all the work that's been put into this, and I definitely see where and we've been talking about this, right? It's one of our strategic plan goals. We know this, right? Like our oversight and accountability. And so I can definitely see some places for improvement and revision. And you guys have also heard me say, and CA Davis and I probably, clear as kind. And when we've gone through recently a concern with an LEA trying to go through the current version of our 114, I will tell you, I'm like, and then what happens next? So I do appreciate this work. I do see some need to refine this. But I would like to understand, as I was going through this rule, and I know that it's, we repealed the parts, so we're kind of moving some things in. I just want to make sure I understand the intent of the process of what this would look like. And so if I may, Chair Carey, if I can just kind of talk you through the part that I understand and then where I get stuck. Okay, so my understanding is the idea is we want to make sure that we're clear on what the definitions are, right? What monitoring mean, what risk assessment means. We also want to be clear then on the superintendent responsibilities of creating corrective action plans. And even before that, I should say a monitoring system. So we need to have a way that we can say for every rule and provision, this is how it's going to be monitored. It sets out kind of like some requirements it's going to go through to determine what a monitoring plan is going to look like for each of the rules. So once we have a structure for the monitoring to be in place, and then if they don't follow those monitoring rules or they're not in compliance, then we have the step where we can go to a corrective action plan, and the superintendent can help put people on corrective action plan. Then there's a need to have one centralized place so we know how many corrective action plans we have, where they are in the process. I know that that's something that we've been missing because we have maybe special ed that's doing corrective action plans. We might have finance that is doing corrective action plans. So I see a need for us to have a centralized system or way to have that. Where I get stuck is if they're not following through with their corrective action plan, is the idea for this new the Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee, are they both the appeal body for a corrective action plan if an LEA doesn't agree with the corrective action plan, and a place where they come to kind of like OLAG, where they're getting sent to administrative rules if they're not complying? Is the intent of this body, the subcommittee, to serve both of those purposes? And I think that's where I get stuck, is once they're not doing it, it comes to the subcommittee, and then they have the option of sanctioning or having more severe sanctions. If you can just help me talk through that last piece, I just get stuck.
No, that's a fair question. Let me just start with the current oversight system has not changed, meaning under Rule 114 as it currently exists, board leadership can investigate, they can recommend a cap. I know that our board leadership recently, met with a district that they had questions about. This doesn't change that. It doesn't change the role of the superintendent, meaning globally, not one superintendent. The superintendent has the same responsibilities and duties under this version as the current version. So that has not changed at all. The one new addition is this Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee. And the role of that committee is if board, and we outline the situations where it's possible. If board leadership is trying to resolve something and it can't be resolved, they don't have to. They can refer it to the subcommittee and say, we're stuck, we're getting defiance. Can you help? If a member of the superintendent team, the superintendency, I'll refer to it as, if they say, look, we're trying to institute this cap, they're not complying. If audit says all the time and money we have spent trying to execute this audit on attendance is at risk because we aren't getting the number of responses that we need to make it a valid survey, they can bring that to this subcommittee. And hopefully the referral to the subcommittee is sufficient to have compliance, because I don't want to talk to anyone in that setting, and I hope that they wouldn't want to show up and explain why they're deficient. But the timing of when and how that happens is controlled almost exclusively by the referring body. So it's not the internal audit, board leadership, a member of the superintendency. Now, there is one provision that says, oh, thank you. There is one that says, or any matter that the majority of the subcommittee determines is appropriate. But otherwise, it is a body that waits to be asked, we need help here. Now, a board member had a very good question, and she said, well, why don't we just send it? Because if you know that the subcommittee is made up of the chairs of all the standing committees plus 2 members of board leadership. And this board member said, well, Joe, why don't you just receive the cap requests for law and licensing? Board member Earl can receive them for standards and assessments, and finance can receive finance. The issue with that is, again, there's no real system. And what this is trying to do is build a system in place so we know where in the process someone is looking at that and has the responsibility for it and what has happened. Because one of the issue is, and I found this out when I said, how many active caps does this board have in place right now? There was no firm answer. We don't know. Now, that's not to say our special education folks don't know how many they're handling. It's not to say finance does, but there's not one place. So when the legislature comes to us and says, is this a problem? We can't see it globally. And so this goes back to the reliability and validation of data. So one of the drivers of this is to build a system so at every point, if someone says, where is this in the system? We know exactly where it is. I was asked, why should there be a subcommittee? Because the alternative is, because originally I had proposed sending all of this to a particular committee. Send it to law and licensing, send it to finance, send it to standards and assessment. And the feedback came in that if you do it that way, every one of these matters will be public. And the problem with that is, if you have an LEA that's working to comply, they just can't. When we say, oh, come up with $600,000 by the end of the week so you can put ballistic film on your windows, there's a good chance by the end of the week they're not going to be compliant, but wow, they sure would like to be. I don't think we want to bring those into a public meeting and talk about those things when there is an attitude or willingness of saying, we want to do this, we can't. Now, who makes that determination if they're willing or being? Well, that is the same people who are doing it now. That is staff, the staff that works with them, has worked with them, have those relationships. So this model truly was hopefully designed to say, everything we have that's working, let's preserve that, let's keep it. The problem, as I understand it, and what I'm seeking to address is, we cannot have audit not getting the materials they need in a timely manner to respond to our requests internally, or it's my understanding even OLAG will come and say, we need this data from you. And we reach out to our LEAs, we don't have it. It was like a it was like a matter we talked about yesterday where it doesn't matter who's paying or not paying. At the end of the day, we're asked to pay the check because it's our responsibility. So they don't want to hear we can't get the data from these 6 LEAs. They're like, well, we're asking you, you're the state board. So I hope that answers your question.
It helps me understand a little bit background. I think I'm trying to understand as we go through the process. So once it goes to the subcommittee, then what happens from there? That's what I want to know. Once it goes to the subcommittee, and is this subcommittee the one receiving the appeals as well? Are they appellate body and an enforcement? If you can help me understand if it comes to the subcommittee, then talk me through what happens from there.
I think the subcommittee would just find out from whoever referred it to us, what is it that you need? We would review the data. Is this something that we can help with? Do we agree that the data is needed? And if it is, then I think in a way, it's a form of escalation, not for the purposes of enforcement as much as I hope it would be another attempt to show another opportunity to get compliance. The final decision of the subcommittee is not final, and the rule makes clear they can either appeal it to the full board or they can use, is it 102, Ben? The appeals, 102 or 103. So they have the option of going either way, but the subcommittee is not the final arbiter, nor is it the body of appeal. This board is.
So it's them being able to find out maybe why there's not compliance, to find out if it's a defiance or an ability to comply.
No, maybe, but I would think that when staff refers it to us, they're probably at the point where they're like, they should be able to do this, but they're not doing it, right? Because staff is already doing that process, right? On the caps they work on. I look at this as they get to a point where they've made the determination, they just don't want to do this. And then you bring in the weight of the elected board, which after talking to staff, they believe is a good idea. And again, it's another opportunity to say, let's fix this. But if staff, I assume if they wanted to say they're complying, but we still want you to do something, they could. But again, the committee doesn't have to take a referral, nor do I think that would happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Member Lair, you have a comment?
I had a clarifying question in your last comment, and I'm kind of a little betwixt and between because I read through the earlier draft and then we just received a draft that I don't even know if you had reviewed late last night. So this is more of a concept kind of question. I've got a bunch of others that once Amanda is finished, but I'm just, as I read draft 1, it looked like, and you just said something to the contrary, that's why I'm asking. When I read draft 1, it looked like you were proposing that this oversight, I was almost going to call it an overreach committee, but I'll call it an oversight committee.
Thank you.
Was the final decider. There was nothing after the discussion of what its roles were that said that the final decision would be a recommendation to the board, which is how all other committees operate. If there's and this could be because the oversight committee has considerable opportunities beyond the superintendent and her cap provisions, there could be some considerable consequences for an LEA. And so I just wanted to make sure, in my mind, that's something the board should speak to. Whatever comes out of the oversight committee should be a recommendation. And then that recommendation would come to the board as the final decider about additional penalties or shorter timelines or something like that. Was that what you intended and it just didn't make it into the draft, or I don't see it, it doesn't seem right that it's a final decider.
Thank you. So, final decider in the sense that they will issue an opinion or a decision, but not final in the sense that the recipient is what I believe there is.
It is.
The recipient absolutely then can, by reaching out to Sybil, the executive secretary for the board, and say, I want to challenge this, I want to appeal it.
So,
And then they have an option of either going to the full board or through the 102 process.
I guess I'm taking issue a little bit with, it is a final decider, which is, again, contrary to what we've seen in other committees, where, yes, the committee makes a recommendation, and then the board has to finalize that. And I much prefer that. I don't like leaving that much power in the hands of a committee, which I also have some concerns about and would like to suggest maybe a different makeup of that committee. But I like a recommendation would be fine, especially as you've explained the role. Now that I understand that better, I can understand a recommendation comes with a lot of thought and from this group or a similar group. But I don't see that committee should be a final decider. But you're anticipating, you're saying, but for appeals of an administrative type, it isn't. You're saying it's not because of those final administrative opportunities. I feel like it is, because then the LEA has to have the gumption and the resources to say, yeah, I'm taking you on. And I don't like putting an LEA in that position.
If I may.
Yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
No, board member, and again, I understand, and I don't want to, I don't want to go back and forth on the definition of final, right? We're final, but this is really final, right? So if we could dial that back, and I'd be okay calling it can render a decision, and then recommendation, but we would need a provision that says, what happens then if they don't follow through, right? Or there has to be some mechanism then that says, well, this is how you would go to the board. And again, like you, I think the full board should weigh in on decisions of consequence. And one of the reasons I want this system is because right now, I don't think the full board sees or even has awareness of the nature, breadth, and scope of the caps that are being opened and closed all around us. And to me, it's analogous to the UPAC, which is we know this system is operating somewhere, but we really don't understand the hows or the whats until the very end when it's like, hey, there's this cap we need the board to weigh in on. And it's the informality of the system that I'm trying to address here with more direction. So again, my preference is, just like my initial preference was, send it to each committee. Put it on the agenda. But what happens is then, do you really give enough time for these LEAs and staff to work out resolution? Because once it's public, then I think people have to worry about perception, right? How is this going to be perceived? What can I say? What can I give up? Do I really want to? And I think it slows down rather than promotes the resolution process. That was the hope here, which is, my hope is that we never have to come to a decision or final opinion, because I hope that by inserting this step, it will help staff reach the resolution that it needs. But I am not wed to having it be final, as long as there is a direct flow to the board at that point, if that helps.
Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question.
Use your microphone.
It does answer my question. And I am pleased that you're open to, you say direct route, that doesn't, to me, say appeal route. That means it goes to the committee and then to the board as a matter of rule, as a matter of an outlined process. So that's just one issue. And I hope we could come to some resolution, but it certainly helps to hear what you're thinking how you would think that that transition moves.
If I share just one, if I may.
Please.
So you said it goes to the committee, then the full board. Did you mean the subcommittee and then the full board? Okay, I just wanted, and I would agree with that. I wouldn't want to see it go to the committee and then the board, but, okay, thank you.
Thank you. In AAG, Bill, maybe this question will go to you. I know that, and I don't have a problem with a subcommittee creation, so I just want to be clear on that. I do have a question, because right now it's listed as where a subcommittee of executive committee shall be created consisting of the board chair, one vice chair is determined by the board chair, and the chair of each standing committee. And maybe I need to clarify first, Chair Carey, would that include, when we say standing committee, would that include the USDB
And
committee and audit? Or were you just thinking of the three?
That's a good question. I am okay with a standing committee. I don't believe audit is a standing committee, and one of the things that I think we would need to clean up would be addressing that. I think it would be important for audit to be represented on this, perhaps more so than USDB. What I am trying to avoid is if you make the committee up to 7, it makes it much harder for the LEA, whether it's a direct flow to the full board or an appeal to the board. Well, now you have 7 people basically saying this is what we want. And it really puts the LEA at a disadvantage for a fair appeal when 7 of the people are already weighing in. And that's why I was trying to keep it at a number that wouldn't make any decision tilt in favor of the board.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking more at like a member of like 5 individuals.
That's what I thought would be appropriate,
Okay.
but I do think that audit, we need to incorporate a way for audit to be represented because some of these issues, if not a majority, I think will go back to audit and their role.
Yeah, let me have AAG Bill speak to the committee, and then I'm happy to have you respond. Oh, so AAG Bill, so the way it's currently written and understanding that, are there any concerns with the structure of the way that it's written currently?
So legally, no, I don't think there's any concerns from a legal or bylaws perspective. I think it's compliant. The only thing I would say is just, this adds an additional responsibility to the chairs of those committees that maybe they didn't necessarily know that they were signing up for at the time that they signed up for them. So I would just say, that moving forward, all those chairs would have to know that accepting a chairship of a committee meant this additional responsibility for them. And whether or not, the board feels that it's fair, I guess, for the current chairs to be slotted in, not knowing that this committee was going to be created under that structure. But that would be for the board to decide. Under the bylaws, it's permissible.
Okay, thank you, AAG Bill. Member Lear.
I just had another clarifying question about adding audit. And maybe Ashley, I haven't given her any notice, and maybe this is something that she would feel comfortable weighing in on, or we could talk about down the road. But usually, if in administrative law, you've got a body that plays 2 roles, and audit is not part of the board, but is an employee of the board. And audit may have brought these concerns into the board. I think it could seriously disadvantage the recipient, for LEA probably, to have audit be part of that deciding group, even as a recommendation. So I have hesitation about that. I also have general hesitation about the makeup of the committee, and when Amanda's questions are through, I'll address some other things. But I would suggest some different, and I hope you're receptive to that. But
Chair Carey, did you want to respond to just this current?
If I could, and I agree, and not just audit, but if there's any conflict, or if there's a body that's making a referral, I don't think any member, to the extent that they were part of the decision to send it to the subcommittee, should be participating in the decision. I don't think that would be appropriate. But in light of that, yeah, I would agree that the the person who made the finding that that should go to the committee should not be on the committee deciding the outcome.
And I think that was my question, Chair Carey, because if a referral can be made by board leadership, but there's at least 2 and possibly 3 members of, or all of board leadership, depending on who is chair of different committees, that could mean that the whole leadership is part of this. And that was my concern with that as well. So just wondering if that would put people at a disadvantage.
It's interesting because I was thinking the same thing, and I thought by capping it to 2 members of board leadership, we could avoid that. But I can see, and that's why you talked about USDB and Leanne, because that would give us these. So thank you for that perspective. But
Okay, Member Lear, did you want to
I
add
did.
anything else?
I don't have that as many questions. I would hope, let me just give you a thought of where I'm leading, that this also needs more work. I think we heard some comments this morning from the group of lawyers who represent school districts that there are some concerns. I spoke with Lexi Cunningham yesterday. She had grave concerns and would like to have further opportunity to discuss some of her concerns on behalf of all school districts. So that's kind of where I'm going, but I did have some other things that I wanted to mention. As the makeup of the subcommittee, I'll just throw this out there for possible thought. I would prefer a model where the board leadership chose the committee like it does with other committees, so that it wasn't a prescribed makeup, and that would allow I think, board leadership to also include sometimes differing perspectives from different committees, also different personalities and expertise within the board. I think that would be a stronger model, and I understand why you'd prefer 5 to 7. I think that's a good thought. But I'd like to rethink, discuss maybe a different process for choosing that committee. The other thing is, and this is kudos to audit committee, and I think, and I'm going to give myself just a teeny bit of credit, it might have been me who asked for an audit tracker a few years ago. Was that true, Debbie? Because I could not, and it was only because my brain was not able to keep, and I really cared about this audit with these conclusions and where are we. That has been so helpful. And I think the part of this that would have an Excel spreadsheet for corrective action plans is a brilliant idea. So I really, whatever happens with the rest of this rule, I think that part is probably the easiest to implement and would be maybe the most helpful piece of it. So I hope that we do keep that piece in there, and maybe just made it seem so easy, but that, if it follows the model of that audit tracker, I think that's just a really helpful tool. So I wanted to add that. I am not, and I heard you kind of referring to it, Chair Carey, and I don't know if you meant it or not. I like the role of this committee as a follow-up to the superintendent, but I am not a big fan of governance by intimidation. I don't like the model. I'll be really honest. I don't make any secret of it for 25 years. I don't like the model of the Legislative Oversight Committee and rules. And it used to be the Rules Review Committee. Now it's the Rules and Oversight Committee. I think that's not a good way to show respect for other policymakers or to govern. So I am not, if this committee follows up thoughtfully and maybe more creatively than the superintendent did, great. But in terms of a heavier hand, I'm not a particular fan. So I'll be really honest about that. I think, let me just double check my notes on the old draft. I'm a little concerned, and we already have kind of this problem, but it says throughout the draft 1 that the superintendent and the staff will work collaboratively, and it also says they'll provide technical assistance. It's really hard for the superintendent to do that and staff to be in that role and be the monitor, and that might be the reason sometimes these caps break down. So I just want to throw that out there for discussion, and maybe that's a good argument for a different body to follow up if the cap is not completed as we would have it completed. Um, um, let's see, I'll skip that. Let me just go back to any other comments. Oh, the other thing that I was that I had a discussion with a few staff members yesterday too, and as the rule was initially written, where the staff would provide, there were 10 or so steps, including a risk assessment of every rule and every rule modification. I felt like that was a tremendous burden on staff members, that we get sometimes as many as 30 rules after a legislative session. And then there's a deadline when those rules have to be implemented by the legislature. I think it's October 15th or November 1. But in any event, asking the staff to do and I don't know what's too burdensome, but an excessive review of all components of how this rule will play out in a timely manner and with their private lives is asking a lot. So I'm not yet persuaded that I think we may have to dial back on what our expectations are for evaluating each rule, whatever we call it, and be realistic with the staff we have and the time. And I've been concerned over the last few years that I've been on the board that we have, because the staff is desperate to write rules and change rules to keep up with the board, we don't have, I think they need additional training so that they're more skilled in rule writing. So I think that's another piece that we would want to talk about, but that also includes writing. That also includes deciding how fast they have to do it. In the interest of time, I think that's, one last thing. The other thing I'm troubled about, and this goes to my issue with what the committee receives. And the last item, and you mentioned it too, Member Carey, was anything that comes to the committee's attention that might be a violation of board rule. I think that's way too broad and intimidating of a reach for a subcommittee. So I would prefer to just delete that and make it a more limited number of things that the committee would receive, emphasizing the role to follow up after the superintendent, if the superintendent's unsuccessful. I also I kept saying that. One more thing. The other thing is I'm not so convinced. One more thing and one more thing, exactly. I'm not convinced that even if it's a committee of 5, that those recommendations, call it what we want. I think it's even harder to argue for if we call it anything final, that could be a protected document. I think under GRAMA, a final administrative decision is, even though it may have to be requested, it's not a protected document.
Chair, if I may?
Yeah, Chair, go ahead.
Just a question. So are you saying that that argument militates in favor of saying it shouldn't be a final decision from the subcommittee because it would subject it to GRAMA, whereas if it were just a pass-through decision that the board ultimately decides, it would be protected?
That's my understanding, that it's sort of in the draft category as a recommendation, but which is protected versus a final administrative decision, which, as I understand, is not protected. And Ben can speak to that.
Director Rasmussen, can you help us get clarity on that?
Chair.
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with the reasoning, but I do think it is protected because while it's under review, I think it would be an active audit or an active investigation, and so you can classify it as protected until it's final.
So we maybe need to explore that a little further. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on this discussion about, like we were talking about with the steps under the superintendent responsibilities. And so designing a monitoring plan. So I'm on lines, let's see, what lines am I on? To make sure I'm on the right draft, I apologize. But basically the portion under the superintendent rule on where we're talking about designing a monitoring provision, including the results of the risk assessment, program outcomes and requirements, reporting requirements, financial requirements. So I think what I'm understanding, and you'll please correct me if I'm wrong, is so we have currently with the framework, and again, I was not here when the framework was created, so I'm not married to any type of thing. But my understanding of the framework.
I wasn't. I want a divorce.
Okay, so we're having a separation right now. So it's a heated discussion. So this is, I guess my question is, so with those, because with the categories, it kind of helps, from my understanding and the way that I see it, it kind of helps delineate, is this something that the LEA has to have an accountability system for, or USBE? However, where I think that there's a gap, and I think that you spoke to this, is that are we not holding them accountable for compliance? So we're saying, oh, you have to hold on to this information, but once we're ready for it, you need to have it. But then if they don't have it, and legislators or whoever, then we're scrambling. And so I do see a space for, and again, I know that USBE is working on like having a compliance department, and we've talked about FTE for that, right? And I wonder, I'm curious to know if we had a system like that where if we had a compliance department and it was their role then to have some sort of a database where an LEA is reporting on their compliance for every rule. So even if it is a category 1 or a category 2, then our compliance department is making sure that they are getting reports on how and if they are compliant with it. And then at any point, like, I mean, I'm imagining every district has, here's a list of all the rules and which ones are they compliant with. So at any moment we could say, oh, this district is compliant with, 100% of the rules, or, oh my gosh, this one rule, we only have 50% compliance. So we obviously need to address or reteach or whatever. That's kind of how I'm imagining that. So I guess my question would be, does the framework help support that? I'm concerned that I don't know that this is prescriptive enough for me to understand what would be the process. And if it says that with every rule that there's a monitoring plan, then could that monitoring plan look so different depending on if it was a special ed or a finance or I just am concerned that then we might confuse districts a little bit more if those monitoring plans looked so different instead of having a systematic way of reporting that to one location where we have all the information in one. And I know you brought up that if the field thinks that they only have category 1 or category 2, that they don't have to do it. In my discussions with LEAs, it's really more of what's the due date? If I know the due date, we will comply. And if they don't report by a due date, then we actually have more accountability and say, you missed that deadline, right? And so that's where I see maybe there's potential to, and I know the framework's new. Again, I'm not married to it, I'm not saying, but I do see the use of creating a consistent structure, but that only works if we do have this compliance department that then is streamlining it and requiring LEAs to report on their compliance on those category 1s and categories 2s, where as USBE, we're not the ones with as much oversight on those. So just wanted to offer that to that discussion. That's kind of how I've seen it as I've had discussions. And with that, I would say, I know there's a fiscal note attached to this rule. I wonder if that could help minimize our fiscal note potentially, because if we're having to go back and rewrite all of our rules, I don't know that I want 10 to 15 rules coming back because we have to redo a monitoring piece. We've been doing a lot of rules every time. I mean, since I've been on the board, every rule that we have passed has added a category. And I just worry that then we're going to go back and redo, or that even the timeline may be on that, because I know that, or my understanding, and maybe Elise, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's currently a deadline for our compliance that's in 111. Because I'm
Yes, so in 111, right now it says on or before July 31st, 2029, each program or set of requirements shall be designated into the framework categories.
Yeah, so I'd also offer that maybe we consider having some sort of a deadline for whatever compliance or oversight we have, where it gives us some times to get LEAs on board with this, but it also holds us as an agency and the superintendency to accountable for making sure that the oversight is in place, whatever that looks like. So a couple of thoughts on that. Did you guys have anything to add?
Just a few thoughts. I mean, I really feel like these are a lot of things that were brought up are things that we have been doing without the responses that we need to have. And so when it comes to an area of compliance, I think about this guardrail, right? We're passing all these rules, but there's not the mechanism of enforcement. And I know that's the case because in one of our departments, there's over 100 schools that are non-compliant in the area, and they're just sitting there. And it's an area that could be enforced. So I really feel like we need to, and it's not about punishment, right? It's really about trying to enforce some of these things that are already in place. And we talk about new legislation and new laws that are coming down, and there will continue to be until we come to a place where we're willing to enforce what's already in place. And if we're not, we should stop writing rules. But if we have these rules in place, we ought to step into a position where we're willing to enforce them. And I know for sure our staff is even a little bit timid to do that because there will be some pushback, right? This is an area that we've not really, taken a lot of action. There'll be some pushback there along the way. But I think, like Member Carey says, as we begin to do that, we'll start to see some of these smaller things even begin to fall into place. So I don't think this is an area that we should abandon. I think we should move forward and try to put some of these things in place. So that's what I would encourage us to do.
Okay, thank you, Member Hall. And I would second that I would like us to move forward with this. I just do think that there's some refining and maybe some, and we heard it, like we've gotten some feedback recently that we want to get some input from LEAs and also even just from our superintendent on the structure and the framework piece. Even the structure of the rule itself, Chair Carey, if I may, just the organization of how it's written now in the flow of the rule, if I may give a suggestion, I would like to see it go from the authority to the definitions to the superintendent responsibilities to corrective action plans, then the oversight and accountability subcommittee, and then appeals, like that. So some restructuring just in the flow of it. Okay. Yep. I will give that feedback. Yes, absolutely. Member Lair, did you have another?
I just had one. I have another thought. On lines, toward the end, on line 403, it talks about what the board is able to do, and it says, refer the complaint, evidence, and findings to the Attorney General's office or the relevant district attorney's office. I wonder, Chair Carey, if you've had any opportunity to contact those offices and see their willingness to actually follow up on some of these graver concerns.
I have not, and I'm reading that now. I think that language came from a discussion that we had, or that I had with either staff or a stakeholder. But I'm reading it in the context of the earlier discussion about not being the final decision maker. And it would seem inappropriate if it would flow to the full board. That would better be suited anyway as a decision the full board would make.
And I'm not sure I'm understanding. You say instead of that, it would be a final board decision, or are you saying it would come after a final board decision?
After a final board decision.
I agree.
It would, your concern would still need to be addressed in terms of, is there a willingness to receive this and act on it? But I would assume that if the board is making a decision that this warrants the attention of the Attorney General, it would be sufficiently grave enough for them to at least seriously consider it. Whether or not they take it, that is their decision.
And just the brief follow-up. My hesitance, I don't mind putting it in here, and there are some rules that have it in here as a sort of as a routine piece. But in my experience, the AG's office as well as the district attorney's office have, I can count 3 times, I think, when they've actually, they think that we should keep our own house clean. They have not been, they've been very reluctant, let me put it that way, to spend much time on investigation. So again, it's kind of routine to have it in there, but I think in reality, it's not a very realistic final step for whoever might benefit from it.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Okay. I would, like I said, I would like to see us move this forward. I don't know that I'm ready to vote to pass it to the full committee yet. However, I do know that we are already going to be having an extra meeting to discuss the Catalyst Center. I would be, or I'd be curious to know if there is some interest in being able to move, because I think that there's some corrections and motions, and I don't know that I want to spend the time and the tedious work to do that right now. So I'm wondering if our committee might be open for a motion to have this move to our extra meeting with it moving to the full board in November. So we still stay potentially on the timeline, but then have a draft that addresses the concerns that we could revisit in that. So Chair Carey, if you maybe can speak to that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that because we already need to address the Catalyst Center, and as I've listened, and again, I've taken notes, I think most of the feedback, I'm not even going to say most, I can't see of anything that's a definite non-starter, right? So I do think that, again, it's a major provision, a major rule change. So I think that would give us the opportunity to take another look at it. My preference is that we do move it to the full board, but in light of the feedback given, and again, the deference to discuss, let me incorporate these, get this back to the committee, and then I think that would be workable to do it at the time of the additional committee meeting.
Member Lear, go ahead to the motion. Well, actually, there's no motion, but to the discussion.
Right, to the well, you didn't make a motion,
Not
you
a
were just
formal one, yeah.
suggestion. To the suggestion. I have heard more concerns actually about this rule than I had about R277-322. Especially from LEAs, who I think the first version was pretty daunting. And I think that I would want time to have those have discussions with those groups. I'd like to hear from USBA. I'd like to hear from the group of attorneys that represents school districts. I had a memo here, 2 pages worth, that they were circulating that raised serious legal concerns and local control concerns. I'm not thinking that I would be ready to move this on after another special meeting that is also taken up with another issue. I don't mind discussing it in another meeting, but I want to make sure that whether you hate it or love it, and you've made it very clear for a year and a half that you don't like it, the framework took a year plus to develop. It was thoughtful, it was deliberative, and I think to just throw it over when it's only been in place for a year is not particularly wise in my mind. So I'm not ready to do that. And I'm especially not ready to do it in the less than 30 days that we've been discussing it. So I like I said, happy to discuss at the special meeting. I'm pretty sure I won't be ready to make a recommendation. Perhaps after another November board meeting. I don't think 2 or 3 months to undo the work of a year and a half is asking a lot.
Chair Carey, did you have a response?
Yeah, again, if it were a close call, I'd be inclined to see it that way, but again, this isn't necessarily, it's not my analysis that the framework isn't working. It is what I've heard from staff when they've felt they could speak in a candid manner. It's what I'm hearing from the field in terms of they don't want to see it changed because it allows them to say we can take this money and these employees and apply them over here because we know USBE isn't going to do anything with this particular program. So I want to incorporate these changes. I will reach out to Heidi Alder and was it Jeremy? Hiram. And I'm happy to speak with them. I'm happy to speak with anyone who will look at this and say, okay, how do we make this better? I'm willing to have that conversation and let's do that. But I would like to see, my preference would be, let's just pass this through, get it before the full board. But again, because of the committee's deference and having a discussion rather than let me make 50 motions, I would agree to Vice Chair Bollinger's suggestion that let's pair this with the Catalyst Center meeting that we need to have, and then have this produced in advance so you can review it and talk about it. I have received feedback on 322 and 114, and again, it was to the draft 1 version, and I'm hoping that as individuals see draft 2, and then hopefully listen to the, I think, highly productive discussion that we had today, that many of those concerns will be addressed. Will everyone? Most likely not. That just doesn't happen. But to the extent we can make the rule better, I'm absolutely willing to listen and incorporate that. And at the end of the day, it's this committee's decision and then the full board's decision.
Okay. Any other comments before I try to make it? Okay, member Lear?
We talked about this and I didn't mention it. I think another possibility, Chair Carey, if you, again, in the spirit of thinking about this going down the road, I would prefer not to repeal the framework immediately. I don't think they're incompatible side by side. And because that was developed with such thought and such experienced people doing it, I am reluctant to just repeal it. I don't mind seeing if the two could be compatible, at least for a period of time. And if we find that this is more effective and we see results of that, then great, let it go. But I'm not, I don't like the idea that we just repeal it, it's gone. When we put such effort into it and thought. So just consider that in your ruminations.
And I would just follow up with that is when we look at where, I think you had mentioned this, that the purpose is to create a system where compliance is possible. There's obviously a gap in our compliance. I don't know that it's the framework itself, but I do think it's the accountability portion. And so I would probably, agree with Member Lear is that I would like to see if we have a compliance component and accountability component in place, then where are we looking now instead of redoing all of the things, with the notion that if that still doesn't address it, then we get rid of the framework and have to come up with a new monitoring system. So that I would agree with that at this point. But with that, I'd like to make a motion, and Elise, maybe you can help me word this correctly. And would it be a continuation to our special meeting? I would like to basically move R277114 and R277111 to a special meeting. And Member Carey, maybe I should, or Chair Carey, so our backups are going to be due October 28th. That would be the backup, but we would also have to make sure if we were going to put it on the agenda. I know that leadership, we have our agenda meeting on the 22nd, our executive meeting on the 23rd. So by that point, we would have to for sure know if we were moving this to, if as a committee, we were moving it to the November, or if we were going to continue it in our November committee meeting. But I just definitely want to make sure we work on it in our special meeting, depending on when we can do that. So Chair Carey, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, my first thought is we should never talk about the backup date for a future meeting when we're less than 24 hours past the last meeting. Seems unduly harsh, but yeah, so are you saying we should maximize, we should push it as close to the 28th as possible, but still give enough time to turn around and make sure it's in backup by the 28th? Or are you saying let's get it done earlier? That's what you're saying? Okay.
I'm just saying that I would love to have an updated draft sooner than later, or our extra committee meeting sooner than later.
And I don't have any issue on my end because I can go through this, but I would ask Board Member Hall regarding the catalyst. You said we needed more time. You couldn't do it today, but is it possible for you to have it ready in a week? Okay. That's the same ambiguity you brought yesterday. So we will, then we'll say, let's target a week, and then, Vanessa, would you be willing to send out a doodle poll to see our availability for next week? Thank you.
Okay, so my motion is that the committee bring back items 1.5 and 1.6 to the special October law and licensing committee meeting. Is there any discussion to that? Okay, with that, let's go ahead and vote. Those all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously, and I will turn it back to you, Chair Carey.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank the committee. I do appreciate the approach, which allowed, I think, for great discussion, candid discussion, and then the opportunity to make amendments and look at those at a subsequent date. I also just want to thank the committee for its willingness. I know that we were tasked by the full board to review UPAC, and I think that's a tremendous responsibility, and I'll be reaching out, and I would also ask you to reach out to me in terms of how you think those meetings would be most productive. I have had some members reach out and say, Board Member Carey, we need to have stakeholders come. They need the opportunity to come and present. We need to hear from them. I have heard others, none from this committee, who said no, it should be strictly members of the committee and members of the board. I am in the camp of this is an opportunity for us to hear the best ideas, and I don't think this board has a monopoly on those ideas. So again, if you have ideas on how you believe we could best contribute in terms of the makeup of the committee, and not the makeup, but what we should be looking at, who we should be speaking to, please put those together, and then reach out to me, and then we can discuss those individually, and then I'll put a proposal together for the committee. And then with that, one final motion. But, Erin didn't make any she's the. Any opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.